I mean, I've brought a few things, I suppose. Like I built my own sprinkler controller with like a dozen relays and hooked it up to the 24 volt AC input and stepped that down to DC to power the board. And that's probably my most complicated. I tried back when I was trying to build everything from scratch. I tried using these little 2.4 gigahertz chips that you could plug into an Arduino, and then you have to define your own data packets and your communication protocols and all this. And I was so excited about that. I mean, I kind of got it working, but it's a lot of overhead.
Yeah.
When I finally found the ESP Home project, I was like, yeah, we'll dump that. We're going straight to ESP Home.
That's fair. So can I, while we're on the topic of sprinklers then, can I ask you about your sprinklers? So are you actively using Home Assistant today to control your sprinklers around the house?
Yes. Yeah. So I have 10 zones so I have 10 zones and I'm using an ESP32. I started out with an Arduino Mega because it has tons of pins, and I didn't want to bother with breakouts and a whole bunch of stuff. And but I finally switched over to an ESP32 so that I could run ESP Home directly on it. So it controls each of the zones. The Home Assistant controls like when it starts and how long it runs, that sort of thing. But it pushes all that config onto the board. And so it uses like sensors and inputs to set the run times. And then it says, okay, now run. And then the board controls all the running. So if Home Assistant loses connection while the sprinklers are running, it still keeps running as long as it doesn't lose power either.
So just so I understand correctly, so Home Assistant can say, all right, you need to run for 30 minutes. So it will tell the ESP board, all right, run for 30 minutes. And then it will just turn itself off after 30 minutes.
Yeah. And then, so it starts a script on the ESP board and then that just runs. And when it's done, then it stops.
Nice. So are you using, so Home Assistant is, I'm guessing, controlling, all right, it hasn't rained for a few days, so I need you to water today for 30 minutes at this time.
Yeah, so I've tied it into a few things, like the rain level. My neighbor has a rain gauge, like a big fancy weather station, the few $100 ones. So I bought the cheap little RF radios, and I'm borrowing his rain gauge.
Does he know you're borrowing the rain gauge?
I haven't mentioned it to him. I think he'd be okay with it, but I mean, he's the one sending the signals to me, right? Yeah.
So can I just ask you, would you have to pair it, or can you just like sniff the signals anyway?
Yeah, you just sniff it. And in fact, like the software is so clever, you just run it and it finds it. Yeah. It knows, people have written these decoders and temperature sensors. Like when I set it up and I put it outside so the antenna had good signal. I just wanted to see how many I was picking up, and there's like 30 or 40 just in my little neighborhood.
Wow.
That's pretty cool. I should
once I put it inside, then it
got it here.
Yeah, well, once I put it inside, I can't pick up quite as many signals. There's only 3 or 4 that are reliable.
Sure.
I've got one, and it's like one of the little ones, just a temperature and humidity, but he's got one of the big fancy ones. So I use that for the rain amounts, and then I keep track of the temperature, and then so if the temperature has been over a certain level, like it doesn't get too hot here. Like we normally hit about 95 degrees Fahrenheit in the summer. We don't normally get over 100, but it kind of looks at if it's above 75 or 80, then it increases the percentage. There's a percentage offset that it uses. So if it's cooler, then it knocks it down so it doesn't have to run quite as long. And then if there's been rain, then it'll delay it. And Home Assistant does all those calculations, pushes them onto the ESP board, and then the ESP board just runs whatever I tell it to run.
That's
pretty cool.
Yeah. So 95 Fahrenheit is about 35 Celsius. So not too
sounds
hot
right,
there.
I think.
Yeah. Very nice. Okay, cool.
The only thing is that there's been a few times where something was wrong with the controller, and I'm not sure exactly what. I got it to stop doing it, but I don't know exactly how I stopped it. But it would just leave the sprinkler running. It would say that it's done, but the sprinkler would still be running, and then it would move on and turn on the next one. And so eventually, all the sprinklers were just dribbling water everywhere, and trying to flood the basement.
Oh God!
And there was one time we were out of town, and the sprinklers came on, and I happened to notice on the camera that it was that the sprinklers were still running, and it had been like 3 or 4 hours. I'm like, that's too long. So I called one of the neighbors and asked him to go inside. So I was able to open the garage remotely, because that was one of the few integrations I'd done so far. I built a little ESP board that could open and close the garage. And they went in and came downstairs and just shut off the whole house water.
Yeah, might as well at that point. That's the scary part though, right? When you do this kind of stuff and it's like, oh crap, what happens if, right?
On the one hand, it's scary because I tried to automate something and it didn't work. On the other hand, I automated the garage door and it worked great to allow them to get in and shut off the water. So if not for that, then so I guess it depends on which one your spouse is willing to accept as an excuse.
Yeah. Well, it's nice to have a fail safe, I guess, right?
So you're powering the solenoids, I'm guessing, or everything through just like a single power jack into the ESP board. Does that ESP board then power all the solenoids, or does each solenoid need its own individual power?
Yeah, so there's only one power supply that is powering the board and is connected through the line, and that's typical of how sprinkler systems go.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
I think you're not supposed to run more than one solenoid at a time. I try not to, because then there's not enough water pressure for it anyway. But I have made that mistake of opening up too many relays at once, and I haven't burned it out yet.
So the solenoids, I'm guessing, they require like an active power to remain open, and then if power's cut, they'll close. Is that how they work, or do they actually need just like a signal, enough power to turn it off, and then another power bit to turn it on again? Yeah,
they require constant power to stay open.
Yep. Okay.
And then the relays, like the I guess it's common. It's not ground because it's AC power. Is connected to each of the relays, and then each of the solenoids has its own control wire that's connected, and then the relays are set up to be normally open. And then once I activate that relay, closes it, sends the 24 volts down to that solenoid, it comes on, and then
So I guess that's also a safety measure in terms of like if the power runs out, like if you lose power in the middle of a water cycle, then the sprinklers will shut off.
Yeah. They're supposed to.
They're supposed to. Yeah.
In theory.
I found that if you don't have the diaphragm tightened just right, then it can't release the pressure. It's kind of a cool like mechanical way that it works, where there's this diaphragm and there's a vacuum on one side, and when it opens, it just lets a little bit of water into the other side, and so then the diaphragm can pop open and it opens the valve. So that's all that really has to do to keep it open. And so if it can't release the pressure on that side so that the water can drain out once the cycle's done, then it will just stay open. And I think that's what was happening to me. I just didn't have it tuned just right.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. So note to self, if I ever ended up doing this, just...
I just had to go around and just like, there's just a little set screw, and I just had to twist it just until it turned off, and then call it good.
Nice. Okay. That's kind of cool.
And how have you managed? So you said you got 10 zones. How did you plan out those zones?
Yeah.
Well, that was already done for us because we moved into an existing house.
Nice.
And
okay.
I just just pulled the wires out of the old one and popped them into the new one. That was some of their decisions on where they put sprinklers leave me scratching my head. I have two sprinklers that shoot at each other. Like they're in the same zone and they shoot. Like one's trying to spray one way and one's trying to spray the other way. Instead of pointing them in the direction they're spraying, they pointed them at each other. So it doesn't get really well watered right there.
That's fine.
Fair enough.
Well, isn't it supposed to be like, because technically you do like multiple in to cover a single spot, right? Or you do like half circles or something like that, right? So that there's overlap.
Yeah, there's supposed to be overlap. In this case, it's excessive.
It's just
Like
it's just
they're
watering
literally
each other.
like 2 inches from each other, like spraying right across
Yeah,
each other.
That's pretty good.
Yeah.